Hello, my name is Dr. Jacqueline, and I'm from DTP Leadership Group. But this is Hot Topic Bold Talk. The reason I named my podcast that is because I knew that somebody had to have the ability to come out and provide data from many different writers so that we could at least have some kind of conversation that would allow us to come together and be able to find some answers, even though we might have different opinions. Now, you've had the opportunity by now, if you've had a chance to go out and listen to a video on podcast 49, that I presented a lot of data and information about critical race theory. I've given you 50, where I go into a lot of detail that was not provided in podcast 49. And now in 51, I'm going to really present how there was the formation of critical race theory by some very brilliant scholars, and then how the critics were formed. I'm also going to help you find what critical race theory does to help us read history and its relationships we've had in the past to the present. And so this is podcast 51. 3 different articles will help you and me to understand the authors of critical race theory, or C.R.T. They also assist us to comprehend the time and actions of Trump and Republicans who utilize C.R.T. to stop the movement in our country of appreciating racial difference. The benefits of working together with all of our differences has led companies to bypass their competitors. We have built communities that are supportive of different races and other groups that strengthen our communities. And we've been enlightened all of us in some way about racism, sexism, and any of the other isms, which minimize the appreciation of how difference can strengthen our nation. I go around doing organizational development work, and there is no way in the world a company can achieve worldwide unless they have a diversified workforce. So, how we have gotten to the place where Trump and his supporters could use critical race theory to cause a backlash and really try to stop the advancement we've had in racial collaboration is mind-boggling, but it's also scary as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to give you a number. I've said I'll give you 3 articles. And in those 3 articles, I think some of the brightest scholars in our country will give us the factual data we need to have to understand what is happening. Then it's your decision how you're going to use this material to be able to talk to your friends, family, other people, or how you can talk to some that you know have differences of opinion and be able to have so much knowledge about what is happening that at least you'll be able to present a legitimate presentation about how critical race theory could give us many ways of solving problems in America, and the distortions that have been utilized by Trump and his supporters to make critical race theory something awful is not reality. So the first article is by J.C. Horton in the New York Times, and it's entitled Critical Race Theory, A Brief History, written on November 8th, 2021. It gives us comments from the authors who created the statements to define CRT. And I certainly think the original writers deserve our time and effort to hear their messages rather than only hearing the distortions of their messages. So here are the statements from this article, and I'll tell you who the people are that are part of the article. The person widely accredited with coining the term is Cabrilli Williams Crenshaw, a law professor at UCLA School of Law and Columbia Law School. She was asked for a definition. She first raised the question of her own. Why is this coming up now? It's only prompted interest now that the conservative right wing has claimed it as a subversive set of ideas, she said, adding that news outcomes, including the New York Times, were covering critical race theory because it has been made the problem by a well-resourced, highly mobilized coalition of forces of wealthy Republicans putting this out. Some of those critics seem to cast racism as a personal characteristic first and foremost, a problem caused mainly by bigots who practice overt discrimination, and to frame discussions about racism as though they are shaming, accusatory, and divisive. Critical race theorists say they are mainly concerned with institutions and systems in the United States. Problem is not bad people, said Mari Masuda, a law professor at the University of Hawaii, who was an early developer of critical race theory. The problem is a system that reproduces bad outcomes. It is both humane and inclusive to say we've done things that have hurt all of us, and we need to find a way out. And I think her statement is really valuable because I don't think Republicans that are supporting Trump have any idea how harmful their behaviors are, nor how racism harms everyone. Critical race theorists reject the philosophy of colorblindness. They acknowledge the stark racial disparities that have persisted in the United States despite decades of civil rights reforms. And they raise structural questions about how racist hierarchies are enforced, even among people with good intentions. Proponents tend to understand race as a creation of society, not a biological reality. And many say it is important to elevate voices and stories of people who experience or who have experienced racism. But critical race theory is not a single worldview. The people who study it may disagree on some of the finer points. As Professor Crenshaw put it, C.R.T. is more a verb than a noun. It is a way of seeing, attending to, accounting for, tracing and analyzing the ways that race is produced, she said. The ways that racial inequality is facilitated, and the ways that our history has created these inequalities that now can be almost effortlessly reproduced unless we attend to the existence of these inequalities. Professor Matsuda described it as a map for change. For me, she said, critical race theory is a method that takes the lived experiences of racism seriously, using history and social reality to explain how racism operates in American law and culture toward the end of eliminating the harmful effects of racism and bringing about a just and healthy world for all of us. Oyan Puan, and an associate professor with Colorado State University who studies race, education, and intersexuality, said that the opponents of critical race theory should try to learn about it from the original sources. If they did, he said, they would recognize that the founders of C.R.T. criticized liberal ideologies and that they called on research scholars to seek out and understand the roots of why racial disparities are so persistent and to systemically disable and dismantle racism. So, what they're doing is they're calling on research scholars to seek out and understand the roots of why racial disparities are so persistent. They've been in our country all from the very beginning. And what is it that systemically and systematically is that we need to do to dismantle racism? To that end, branches of C.R.T. have evolved that focus on the particular experiences of Indigenous, Latinos, Asian Americans, and Black people and communities. In her own work, Dr. Poon has used C.R.T. to analyze Asian Americans' opinions about affirmative action. That expansiveness signifies the potency and strength of critical race theory as a living theory, one that constantly evolves, said Maria C. Ledesma, a professor of educational leadership at San Jose State University, who has used critical race theory in her analysis of campus climate, pedagogy, and the experiences of first-generation college students. People are drawn to it because it resonates with them. And I think that's the reason that I find it fascinating and really grateful that it has been written. Some scholars of critical race theory see the framework as a way to help the United States live up to its own ideals, or as a model for thinking about the big, daunting problems that affect everyone on this planet. I see it as global warming. Professor Matsuda said, "We have a serious problem that requires big structural changes. Otherwise, we are dooming future generations to a catastrophic world they'll be living in. Our inability to think structurally with a sense of mutual care is dooming us, whether the problem is racism or climate disaster or world peace." So I think this article is very powerful. In the article published on April 11, 2022, entitled Why Critical Race Theory Matters, is an accounting of a discussion between three experts that joined Berkeley Law Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, Kimbuli Crenshaw, Isidore, and Seville Schutzbacher, who are professors of law at Columbia Law School. Distinguished professor of law at UCLA Law and co-founder and executive director of the African American Policy Forum, who has worked and has been foundational in critical race theory and intersectionality, a term she coined to describe the double bind, simultaneous racial and gender prejudice. Berkeley law professor Bridges, that we've already heard about in other podcasts, the author of Critical Race Theory, a primer, and Emerson Sykes, a senior staff attorney at the ACLU's Speech Privacy and Technology Project, who focuses on First Amendment free speech protections and is working on litigation involving some of these new laws that Republican-dominated states are passing. If you want to read another thorough description of critical race theory, then you will read this article. They have some of the most factual data on how Trump and the Republicans started using C.R.T. Bridges gives these statements. We can trace back to September 2020, when a conservative activist, Christopher Rofu, appeared on Tucker Carlson's Fox News show explaining to the audience there that CRT was being taught in executive agencies in these trainings. Now, of course, it's highly unlikely that actual CRT, the CRT that she talks about introducing to the law schools, and by Professor Kendall Thomas, and then I wrote a whole primer about in 2018, it is highly unlikely that what it was being taught in these executive agencies was CRT. Nevertheless, Kendall Thomas says that it wasn't being taught. It was an ideology that taught that there was no oppressor race and no oppressed race, and also some nonsense about it, and a caricature of what CRT actually is. So this individual is not an expert who was in that interview, Christopher Rofu. He didn't have any idea about what a critical race theory was. Somebody from the Trump administration was watching the show. And Trump issued his executive orders shortly thereafter on September 2020. That's coming on the heels of a long, hot summer of protest in response to the murder of George Floyd. A lot of observers had said we were entering into a racial reckoning. And she said, I was bombarded by emails since attention was being brought to racial justice. And we're talking about Bridgers now. And I understand the recent attention to CRT, especially as a caricature by folks on the right, to be a direct response to that racial backlash. It's designed to put those people back where they were before the protests and the awakening to racial inequality that we started to witness in the summer of 2020. So it was their purpose to put anybody but whites back in their place, and then definitely to stop the discussion of racial equality, because they're looking at racial inequality. They're distorting the CRT theory. Now, I'll say this article is excellent and covers some of the things I've already covered and more powerful statements about what CRT is. For those of you that want to look deeper at CRT, go read this article. The legal minds that are a part of this discussion are outstanding, and it's impossible to walk away from it. And it's the one I'm talking about that was published on April 11th, 2022, Why Critical Race Theory Matters. Now, it's impossible to walk away from this article without understanding CRT and the distortions that are occurring regarding CRT. Another article I found very helpful was the editors of the Encyclopedia Britannica have written an excellent article on critical race theory. It was updated on June 30th, 2023. Their descriptions of what is critical race theory, background and early history, basic tenets of critical race theory, the social construction of race and normality of racism, examples of racism in America, definition and examples of microaggressions that are directed at people of color every day, interest convergence, differential racialization, intersexuality, and the voice of color, and academic and political criticism of critical race theory will definitely increase your understanding of what the conflicts are and how they exist. So I think this article is excellent. Britannica describes other actions that were taken by Trump and the Republican Party to make CRT the culprit and used to turn back racial advancement and the understanding of race from a systemic perspective. And so here is the Britannica's statements about it. So it's adding to the article I've already given you that shows how Trump found out about this. The long-standing problem of anti-Black racism in the United States drew sustained and sympathetic national attention in the 2010s, following the acquittal of an American man of German and Afro-Peruvian descent on charges of murder for having shot and killed an unarmed Black teenager who he perceived as suspicious. That incident and several later unjustified killings of Black people by police triggered demonstrations in cities all over our country. Black Lives Matters, or BLM, movement was formed in 2013, and they dedicated their movement to combating racism and anti-Black violence, especially in the form of police brutality. Republican President Donald Trump, from 2017 to 2021, and his political allies explicitly endorse well-worn racist stereotypes by castigating BLM protesters as thugs and falsely accusing them of violent attacks on police and private property. In a later successful effort to deflect public attention from the problem of racism and to manufacture a provocative social issue that would galvanize conservative Americans, Trump and other Republican leaders opted to attack C.R.T., which they characterized as a false anti-American creed of radical leftists and anti-white racists. Now, you'll remember that C.R.T. was started to question some of the civil rights leaders and some of the leftist individuals. So they don't know what they're talking about. They additionally warned the leftist teachers were attempting to indoctrinate American children by teaching CRT in public schools. In fact, owing to its complexity, CRT in its fully developed form was being taught only in law schools, to colleagues, and at universities. Through generalized versions of some of its claims did appear in the curricula of some public schools. It was not a thorough presentation of it. Several Republican-led states adopted bans on the teaching of what was called critical race theory, which amounted to any suggestion that racism is entrenched in American society. So that's what they're fighting. We don't want to have to admit that racism is entrenched in American society. Here's some other things they did. That people of color continue to be oppressed because of their race, that white people may harbor and act upon racist attitudes of which they are unaware, or that white continue to enjoy a variety of benefits generally denied to people of color, the notion of white privilege, among other alleged falsehoods. So that's what they're trying to put out there. And they're trying to deny that we have white privilege, white immunity, and white supremacy. Now, when even though that Trump issued an executive order banning racial sensitivity training in federal agencies, alleging that the workshops were teaching diversive and anti-racist ideas. According to some critics, Trump's order and the statewide bans were more than a little ironic. In former cases, because Trump had long encouraged the racial resentment among his white supporters, he continually repeated racist slurs. And in the latter case, because the bans seem to support the view of CRT scholars that racism is inherent in the law and legal institutions of the United States. So their actions are showing how their lack of understanding of racism and how it's inherent in our institutions in the United States is showing how their own racism and the things that they do is coming out as they present these bans and other things. Now, we know that when President George Biden came into office, he reversed the ban on sensitivity training in federal agencies by executive order. So here's how I'd like to conclude this podcast. I wanted to present more facts about what critical race theory is, and also to provide articles that address the severe distortions of C.R.T. to create political gain with white people by Trump based on a Fox News interview on Tucker Carlson's show with a man who had no understanding of critical race theory. One of Trump's staff, as you know, I've already told you, heard the interview, gave the information to Trump, and Trump has done everything possible to create racial divisiveness, to feed fear and disinformation to his supporters. There are many articles that clearly show what Trump did and how his supporters in various states have expanded his distortion of C.R.T. to enhance their political gains. I want to end with the last paragraph of the Encyclopedia Britannica article. C.R.T. has influenced scholarship in fields outside the confines of legal studies, including women's and gender studies, education, American studies, and sociology. C.R.T. spin-off movements formed by Asian Americans, Latinx, LGBTQ, Muslim, and Native American scholars have also taken hold. In addition to the issues mentioned above, C.R.T. scholars have addressed hate speech and hate crimes, affirmative action, immigration, and voting rights. I think we all need to face the fact that we have a real danger in our society, and it is not critical race theory. So I hope you will pay attention to my polling questions, and also to give me a clear message of what you've learned from podcast 51. And also you can convey to me what you find difficult about what I present to you. I'll be grateful to have those comments. This is Dr. Jacqueline from Hot Topic, Bold Talk.